Welcome to the earnings call, and this is a virtual meeting, and I certainly hope that while we can't see you, but we certainly hope that you stay healthy and safe. Over the next 1.5 hours or so, we'll be sharing with you the results for Q1, as well as giving sort of a discussion on the outlook, which is I think something that you are most interested in. But please also bear in mind that this is still early into the process, right? We are, as a country, as the world, we are entering in this unprecedented crisis. So in that sense, we'll try to give you some dimension of how we see things, but at the same time, please take this whole thing with a grain of salt. I think we'll be able to see more and be able to assess more in Q2. Now, let me start by introducing the panel. We have a full set of team here. On my left, President Pinapipan. In the center, you know them, Jens. Next to them, President Kusarat. And right side most is Chief First Officer Kunanusha. So all of us will be here to answer the questions, but primarily in the beginning, next 45 minutes or so, Kun Jens will be walking us through Q1 results, and we'll save sufficient time for Q&A. You can do Q&A by, unmute and ask the questions, and we'll be to do so. Hopefully we can manage the logistics. Alternatively, you can also send in the questions. Some of you have already done so. Towards the end, what we'll do is that we'll read off the questions that have been asked but not yet asked in a live session. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jens to go ahead and take us through.
Okay, yeah, good morning. I think what I'm going to do is actually take the mask off here, because otherwise it might be a little bit hard to hear me. So if you can just get the presentation up, please. Okay, so as Konaraka said, I basically run through the key numbers over the next 40 minutes or so. Please hold your questions and everyone mute, and then we open up the floor. So first of all, let's say this is probably a quarter which requires significantly more explanation than usual. Some of that is because we have some structural changes in the way how we're reporting. And so that has two elements to it. One is TFRS 9, which again changes the way how we are doing some of the income recognition, but also loan staging. And then also the fact that now for the first time our bank insurance partnership with FWD comes completely through. You would see some of the changes in the numbers. And then of course we have the whole COVID situation. So there are the relief programs coming in, debt assistance measures. We get some guidelines from the BOT. To be fair, a lot of this is only taking place right now, so it's not affecting so much Q1 numbers. But again, we will try to point out where we believe some of these numbers going forward will actually be affected by some of these measures. So the way how we thought on running the presentation is we just quickly talk about key changes under TFRS. And the reason is for that, because otherwise we would have to footnote a lot of numbers in the first quarter, because we would always say this is now with, without. So we give you an overview so that you can actually have this in mind when we look through the first quarter results. And then we talk specifically about the outlook of what we're seeing, what we can probably already say, and where it's a little bit too early. So key changes under TFRS, and basically there's a group of things under classification and measurement, and there's some under impairment. Classification measurement is mostly about interest income recognition, some elements on the fee and income side, and then also on how do we recognize capital gains, and then the other one is loan classification as well as provision. So first, on interest income and fee income recognition, as you know, going forward, we will actually report effective interest rate. So over the life cycle of a loan. That means is if you have contractual rates which vary over the loan life, you will actually rather report an average rate than actually showing these step-ups. And because we have a lot of book, especially on the mortgage side, which are having these step-ups where we have a relatively low rate in the first 3 years, which will then go up, and we actually start seeing higher income recognition. And so for the first quarter, that amounts up to 30 bips in NIM, or if you translate that to NII, it's roughly 2.2 billion. So that adds on top of our normal NIM. And so therefore, if you see a higher NIM, some of that actually comes straight out of this different income recognition. On the other hand, you have fee income recognition where you are supposed to amortize that over the life of a financial asset. And so that is mostly fast loans. So if we have front-end fees, commitment fees for loans which we're providing or granting, then that is supposed to not be booked in one go, but actually booked over the lifetime. So because of that, we actually have a lower non-NII of 0.7 billion. So that actually is reducing our non-NII income, and the amortization will basically booked up in NII. So therefore, again, if you see certain drops in especially loan-related fees, again, most of that is due to that different income recognition. Secondly, the way how we are thinking or how we are classifying our investments. So you know that used to be general investment, held to maturity, availability for sale, trading. And going forward, you only have characterization, basically what is amortized cost, what goes as fair value to P&L, and what goes to OCI. As you see, only the element of fair value to P&L is roughly 11%. That's a relatively small but still kind of sizable number given our balance sheet. And the only thing why that is important is you might see somewhat more fluctuation in mark-to-market losses than what you have seen in the past. And losses can also be gains, so there's a little bit more volatility in it. Again, given the size of our book, not material, but within a quarter, especially if you see these massive market disruptions, right, what we have right now, you might actually see some of that coming through, which was not so much in the past. The other one is, I think people might be looking at it because especially equity investments might actually go, or where people might be concerned about, and you see that only the smaller one is actually going to P&L. But the larger part is actually going to OCI, and a lot of the increase was mainly because of the fact that we bought units from the asset management company, and as some part of BOT measures in order to get a little bit of panic away as some of the mutual funds, especially the money market funds, started to get liquidated very, very quickly, and so we provided liquidity by buying some of the units. And again, temporary measure, which will probably go and disappear over the next couple of months. So lastly, there were a lot of questions always beforehand. Where is the staging? How much is in stage 1, stage 2, stage 3? As you see on page 6, we have the old classification and the new one. Again, if you see, of course, non-performing has not changed very much, but then special mention compared to stage 2, which now stands at roughly 8%. And some of that is because what used to be underperforming, which were some of the restructured loans, which were, and from our perspective, still completely performing, is now classified under stage 2, even if it is performing, because it went through a significant increase in credit risk over its lifetime, and therefore has to be classified as stage 2. The overall amount and allowance, we are standing at 117, and at the end of the year we were at 114. It's basically mostly in stage 3, but then again kind of equally split between stage 2 and stage 1. Again, these numbers probably over time will also vary, and of course it has not yet reflected the COVID impact. So this is, at this point in time, March 31, mostly has not yet seen a stage migration of some of the loans which went into the relief program according to the measures announced by BOT, but also actually very much in line with other jurisdictions as well. So that's just the area of TFRS. So higher NII and somewhat lower non-NII. We book some of that investments into P&L and impact, which means somewhat higher volatility. And then the allowance basically just says we don't have any excess, but we are actually putting all of that into our existing stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. So with that in mind, talking about the numbers for Q1, and it actually had been a pretty strong operating performance before the onset of the pandemic. As you see, the total income has grown basically roughly 9%, and that is from both ends, NII as well as non-NII. And NII, even if there was pressure on the loan book, and so loan decreased by roughly minus 1.4% instead of 3.5% what we had in mind. But then NIM went actually up quite a bit for two reasons. The one is the 30 basis points I just talked about. But the other one is still that there was already a measure in reducing FIDF from 46 basis points to 23 basis points, which actually helped on the cost of fund side. So while there is the pressure on NII, overall margins were actually going up, and we see 3.54% and compared to the 3.34% which we had beforehand, which is above the guidance. But again, we expect this to come down over the year. First, because we have to pass through the FIDF, but then again, we will probably still see more margin pressure as there will be a flight to more quality. In terms of non-NII, it was very strong quarter, 20% up, mostly from wealth and bank assurance. And wealth, of course, and given the market turbulences, even as people went out, but there was a lot of activity. And then on bank assurance, what you will see is that right now, and we have the first quarter where we really get the full elements in from the deal with FWD, and there are additional bonus payments which are coming in, which actually make this look very, very strong. In terms of net or basically cost-income ratio, because OPEX is actually coming down. We're roughly 8 to 9% down compared to year on year, but also quarter on quarter. And we will continue to do that because it's actually pretty much one of the very few variables we have completely under control. So cost-income ratio is actually standing at 44%, lower than the guidance, but again, given the fact that income will be under pressure, we expect this still to go up. The pre-provision operating profit was pretty strong, 27% up, just because both sides, of course, worked pretty well for us. Liquidity is strong, 92%. A lot of this is, and I go into that into more detail, is coming because a lot of people liquidated their positions, but there's also a flight, again, to quality. Some of the smaller banks are probably losing money, and it's deposited with big banks. So we are actually having ample liquidity. NPLs before COVID really hit and are actually down because of NPL management. We sold a couple of portfolios, but we also wrote off. So coverage ratio is pretty high because we also provisioned 185 basis points in terms of credit costs. And please don't take this as this is the new normal for the rest of the year. I go a little bit into more detail on why we did the 185, which is a combination of different elements. And then CAR and Tier 1 and equity is also still pretty strong. So let me go a little bit into more detail. First, if you see total operating income, non-NII, and I'm on page 10, and non-NII, you see an NII, while down quarter on quarter, is mostly, again, because of the deconsolidation of SCB Life, plus the fact that we have 2 more rate cuts, which, of course, are eating into the NIM. But then, and as you see year on year, NII is actually 4.3, still pretty strong, because we have the effects I just talked about, and then quarter on quarter, despite the drop in the 2 rate cuts, we still have FIDF coming in, we have TFRS, so that's actually where most of the strength is coming from. If you see non-NII, the reason it's down quarter on quarter is because in the last quarter we took a lot of profits still mark to market from our equity positions, because under TFRS 9, and we would otherwise have put it to OCI, and we put it actually to P&L. So this one is down, but then, and if you compare it to year on year, it's actually pretty strong performance with plus 20%. So growth is down, I think no surprises there. If you see our overall portfolio, and we are down in most areas, the only one where we are still kind of holding it, and mostly is SME, and also on the corporate. But again, SME is even in the long term a little bit stronger than corporate loans. But again, that will probably change as we go forward, and talk a little bit about that. Retail loans are down, and some of that is just because we're tightening our underwriting criteria, especially on the auto side, on the housing side. Auto is probably a portfolio we are really looking very cautiously onto that one. Unsecured is down, again, also because of the tightening of the underwriting criteria, but we still keep it up on a year-on-year basis, because we still believe that with the right selection and the right margins, we're actually having a profitable product here, and a profitable segment which we're going after. Net interest margin, as I said, you see 3.2 goes up to 3.54, and most of that comes yield on loans, but you also see that the cost of funds and cost of deposits are coming down, so it's actually on both sides. And we're getting the relief, but then we have not yet seen the full giving it back to customers, so the 40 basis points reduction on all the M-based loans, which we just recently announced with all the other banks, and has not really found its way in. So please expect that to come down, but again, at 3.54, we still have some room to go, given the fact that we targeted around 3.2 to 3.4, we above it anyway, so even it comes down, and it should actually still look somewhat reasonable. And page 14, we are on the loan breakdown, just giving you an idea of the yields. What you see again, if you look at housing loans, so the overall portfolio is pretty stable, right? So we're maintaining that pretty much. What you see is on the housing loans, that is actually where you have a massive uptick on the yield, and basically on TFRS 9, which is exactly where we said it would happen. And given the size of the portfolio, just the pure size, it actually makes quite an impact to our overall NIM and situation. But again, as we start handing some of that over, and the FIDF rate cut, and to some of these portfolios, you will see that some of that will go down going forward. On page 15, we show the little bit breakdown of the loan portfolio and the quality. And so you see stage 3, stage 2, stage 1. Again, stage 2 is pretty hard to compare, and because there's nothing like this in the first quarter. But what you see is stage 3 somewhat, and it's going down. New NPL are coming in a little bit lower. Some of that is just because we put quite a little bit in qualitative assessment in the fourth quarter of 2019. So therefore, we already qualitatively expected some of that to happen, and so therefore this quarter we don't have to do so much. You see that especially on the SME side, because this comes down from 1.97, where a lot of these qualitative assessments actually took place, down to 1.12. However, I would still say overall we're still, of course, at pretty elevated levels. So you see auto loans are up, and so you see that housing loans is at least at the same level and we had beforehand, and corporate, of course, is down. Again, I think that also should give you some idea that it's not like we're putting everything and do stage migration upwards or we keep everything where it is. I mean, if we see things which are really not working, already in quarter one, we also basically put them into the right buckets and provision against it. So in terms of overall provision, and I talked about it, you see 185 basis points. So that is a combination of two things, right? One, it is actually our normal provisioning against just NPL formation, normal and NPL formation. But then there's the procyclicality of the ECL models under TFRS 9, which require you to have a forward-looking perspective on what can actually happen, especially on the macroeconomic factors. And we chosen to basically look into a relatively stressed scenario and provision against that case already in the first quarter. So we looked to the models, run them under stress scenario and the additional requirements which would be coming in, and we basically put it. So this is one-off exercise. Don't expect that to be continuing. So therefore it is elevated. On the other hand, again, we have not COVID in yet. And so as COVID comes in, and we will see how that actually works its way through the books. But there will be the relief measures which will postpone some of that going forward. Once we have more clarity, we will report to it. But again, the ECL deterioration because of macroeconomic factor deterioration, that has happened in the first quarter and in this first quarter. Coverage ratio therefore has gone up because we have NPLs came down and we put in more into our provision. So we are now at 140% at a total allowance of 117 billion, which continuously started to build up over the last year from 104. So now it's 13 billion more, and which again is just a continuation from some of the exercises we did in quarter 3, quarter 4 last year. Page 17, that is now fee income. Again, you see non-recurring and others. Non-recurring is down for exactly the reason I said. In the fourth quarter, in anticipation of TFRS 9, we did some profit taking, but then recurring is up 30% year on year, 8% quarter on quarter. So if you look on 18, the main reason is actually bank assurance. So on the bank assurance side, first it was a very, very strong quarter and a lot of commission income. But then as part of our arrangements with FWD, if there are certain productivity levels which the bank is hitting, there will be also extra payments made and extra bonuses coming in. And so that is reflected right now in the number. Again, the commission income probably will be challenged just because we are right now under social distancing. It's very hard to sell bank assurance products because they actually need to be closed in the branches. And we also just a lot of people don't want to take appointments. So that will probably be challenged for quarter 2, maybe quarter 3. But again, it should still be at a significantly higher level than what we used to have. Wealth management is continuing to be strong, but again, right now in the current market situation, people are very careful, so we expect that to somewhat come down. Lending related, again, that is where I talked about TFRS, and some is coming down because of TFRS, but the other one is also, we already saw that credit card spending was coming down, and as tourists were going down, people started or stopping traveling, and people were just a little bit more cautious. So that is also part of the drop in lending-related fee income. And then transactional banking, and again, we guided this also before, and we expect this as a more secular trend to go down. But again, even here, FX and some of the normal transaction banking related areas, just as there was less tourism and all of that, was also coming down. So, but again, at this point in time, all more than overcompensated by actually very strong bank insurance and wealth management. On 19, this is, as we said, we peaked on the transformation program last year. So some of the numbers, of course, are helped by the fact that we're also deconsolidating SCB Life. But as you see, some of the areas like marketing, which is coming down, just because one thing is we're more efficient in the way how we market, but the other one is also that some of the business activities are coming down, so therefore volume-related costs are coming down. But then under others were actually getting elevated. There were a lot of fee-related elements for some of the transformation programs. That has come down. You see premise and equipment, even if that has some elements of IT in there, just because the fact the premises are now really start getting out, some of the closures are, and the benefits are now taking full effect. We also see this number coming down. Depreciation still going up as we run our investments through, and we will still see that coming in. Some of the capex, again, has been completely dispersed. We expecting somewhere a stabilization around 1.7 going forward. But overall, we are very clear that we don't want to see an absolute number of what we had seen last year of 17.5. The overall number should be lower. Again, it will be 16.4. We try to maintain somewhere on that kind of trajectory, but see if we can do actually better. So with that, CI ratio, I mean, this pure math goes down to 44%. But again, even when we work on the cost side, we see downside risk on the revenue side, which might again drive NCI ratio somewhere up. Liquidity position, as we said, very, very strong because we had a lot of inflow on the CASA side, operating accounts, also banks, corporates, a lot of them keep liquidity, people liquidating their position in the markets. We see CASA is actually coming up. Liquidity ratio, liquidity coverage ratio, all these numbers pretty strong. And then capital down. Some the drop right now is in first quarter because we paid dividends. Again, as we start appropriating the profits in the second half, or from the second half of 2019, these numbers will be coming up again. So, but again, going into that situation pretty strong. I think maybe that's the point also to talk about the cancellation of the treasury share buyback program. And we still maintain that we're actually in a very strong capital position. And the real reason is that on the one hand, you never know. So I think better safe than sorry. But the other one is also we believe there will be other opportunities coming up which might give good returns. So we will expect that as long as the corporate bond market is somewhat frozen, that some of our customers actually want to go up and want to lend again, and we stand ready to help at acceptable rates. But we also believe that maybe some other institutions might not come through the crisis as well as we hope we will get through, which should open up some opportunities. So therefore, preserving that capital and to even look into M&A opportunities is probably the better way to create shareholder value. So again, not that we are considering any scenarios where we are getting into such a stress scenario that we need that capital, but again, just from a prudent perspective as well, and trying to take opportunities. So the outlook. As you see, and I'm not going through all on what our ESC is constantly reporting, but if you see some of the GDP scenarios like for this year, minus 5.6% and export growth down, and policy rate probably still going a little bit further down. And I think this is, we're getting into a really unprecedented area. And it should be just very clear, we have not seen that yet completely reflected in the numbers for the year. So on page 25, what we try to do is we basically going a little bit through the belief measures, the packages, and basically just saying how do we expect that to influence on our P&L and our balance sheet. So I mean, the board, the interest rate cuts, the 40 basis point cut, very clear, and the yield on loans will actually go down. We've seen the cost of funds already, but again, I think the BOT will pretty much watch that whatever we gain on the cost of funds will really be given back to the loans. So net, we believe actually this overall effect will actually wash out. In terms of the grace periods, payment holidays, lower minimum of amounts due for credit cards, personal loan, and all of that, it will drive our loan outstandings. So again, even if we were down minus 1.4% for last quarter, we expect that actually to go up. We also expect NII to go up because right now a lot of this is actually payment holidays, but we are not foregoing any NII. And in some areas, yes, but not on these payment holidays relief programs. So we're still accruing interest. And even if we are provisioning against some of that, because some of that might not come all the way through, as some of the loans might actually deteriorate over time, and we will still see some positive impact. Credit costs, of course, will also go up because some of these payment holidays, we might actually have companies who ultimately will not be able to restructure everything. So we then have SME, and some of the additional relief packages, soft loans, and payment holidays, again. And the impact roughly will be always the same, at least on the balance sheet side. So the loan outstandings will be driven by that. And again, we therefore expect actually loans still to go up. And some have a positive NII. I think on some of the soft loans, NIM will actually be going down because we are kind of cut off at 2%. And so therefore, if you run at a rough 3.54 right now, at 2%, of course, that will kind of bring the average margin down. But again, on the other end, it also has a cost of funding at 0.01%. But again, that will add into the NIM. And on the credit costs, we just have to make sure that we are very, very careful in terms of how we're underwriting, because in the end, and we've seen that also with other loan programs and relief programs and soft loans, and actually that was pretty good business for us as long as we were very clear who we were actually underwriting. So if we're doing this very much shotgun, which we're not intending to do, we should actually have this part of the credit cost under control. But again, credit costs over time will clearly go up. We don't know exactly right now how much. So if we take an overall look at our loan portfolio, because that will, of course, was one of the questions, how will that look going forward? So retail is probably an area where there's real concern. On the other hand, especially the mortgage portfolio is very well collateralized. And then if we really look into the unsecured loans, we only have 6% of total loans, and they actually have a higher margin to absorb some of the losses. However, we clearly tighten the underwriting criteria. We growing in the segments where we believe we actually can still get the right returns. So, and if we will see some stress on the portfolio as the crisis continues, we believe actually we're pretty prepared on that one. And SME, it's a relatively small part of our portfolio. And also the SME portfolio in itself is actually very well collateralized. And so the real SME portfolio is stable. Some of the growth we had in the past were mostly on SSME, which have given us much higher margins. And then we already took quite some downgrading already in Q4. So that's when you go back to the numbers. You saw actually that that there was a major spike, 1.97% in Q4, which was exactly for these qualitative assessments. So already we started to look into this portfolio much more in the past. And then the corporates, I think it's a very, very diversified portfolio across all the industries. The utilization rates so far have remained pretty flat. We don't see any pickups that people are really start drawing down the lines. This is all kind of rather in business as usual, and we watch these utilization, of course, pretty closely. We believe, again, as I said, that as the capital markets are tightening, and some might find it hard to finance through the capital markets and corporate bonds, that there are opportunities for revenue expansion again. And on the other hand, we don't want to be the guys who are just replacing this with relative cheap loans. So we will make sure that we actually get the right risk return profile for that. The strategic priority is pretty clear. We want to help our customers. That's the first priority. I think it's very important to understand that we believe proactively signing up customers to the belief programs is actually helpful. So if the numbers are high, that is it's not an area for concern, as long as it's not going, let's say, 80-90%. But if it really goes up to higher numbers like 30 or 40%, and we believe that is okay, because what we're clearly seeing from crises in the past, it's better to help customers while they have to stay in the picture, to have a cough, than if they're on the ICU. And that is not very good. So therefore, we early identify, we assist, and we cooperate clearly with the regulators in this whole market stabilization. We monitor our portfolio, and we will make sure that those who cannot be helped or we really need much more deeper restructuring, we look into that, and we also provision accordingly, and then we focus on the quality and with a cautious stance. This is not the time to very, very aggressively expand into new areas. We use our digital channels, and if there was ever a reason to basically be very keen on digital, we can actually provide most of our products through easy, be it investments, funds, non-life insurance, deposits. So we will continue to do that and make sure that actually the technology infrastructure remains pretty stable as we see more and more people coming onto that platform. And then cost is probably what we can control the most, so that's where we will focus and make sure that we tightly manage the cost base without sacrificing the investments we need to make in order to create the capabilities going forward. And then I talked about it, if there are opportunities, we are still having the means and the capital to take care of that. Usually, and one says never leave a good crisis unused, and I think we're following a little bit with that paradigm. So we will not give guidance yet, because this is just too early. I think we just wanted to summarize a little bit some of the points I made. I think on the loan growth, probably with the demands from the corporates, the soft loan program, and the people that are stopped repaying, we expect loan growth to go up, interest margin to come up, and it's very clear there needs to be a pickup. But again, we also believe there's still a way to go from the focus on the unsecured, and as you see, going down to the lower end, lower boundary of our margin and guidance, we still have 0.34% to go. Non-NI will be coming down, just because on the banker side and the volatile markets might deter some of the wealth customers to really go back into markets. Again, we will see what Q2 has in store, and we'll see if Q3, Q4 comes up again. So therefore, even if we control cost, if the revenue side comes down, cost income probably comes up. But again, we really will make sure that the cost is as good as we can be. And then NPLs, credit cost, coverage ratio, that is really still up in the air. We have a couple of questions to that extent. We try to answer them as much as we can do. But to be also responsible, whoever says right now they have a clear grip on that, and I'm not quite sure if they have completely comprehend the complexity of some of that. The only thing, as I said, and the 185, please don't take this as guidance that this will be the rest of the year. It has a one-off element in it to take care of some of these macroeconomic scenarios I pointed out some pages back. So that's page 29, and that actually ends it, and I think we should spend most of the time right now probably for questions and answers. Thank you.